Good evening. If you are staying in here with us, we are in 1 Peter chapter 4, we're going to cover verses 1 through 11. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. Thank you again for the opportunity to be able to stand before you in this class setting. And we really appreciate the opportunity for us guys to kind of work on these skills and try to help ourselves grow and be able to participate in situations like this. Thank you. This coming Sunday, Brother Dan Stuvey will be taking over the class. He'll be doing that this coming Sunday and the following Wednesday. 1 Peter chapter 4, we're picking up here tonight in continuation of 1 Peter. And as we know, as we've gone through several lessons now, we're kind of beating the proverbial dead horse. But as a review, as we think back on Sunday's class and to the classes before that, we're reminded that suffering in this life for living righteously is pretty certain. That was the message that Peter was telling the people that he was writing to. It's the message that he's telling us today. As a part of review, if you had the review sheet, and I know some are going around now, thank you for that. My first little section there, it said, how did Peter tell his audience to look at this being the suffering that they were going to be coming into, and who did he say we and they should look at as our example? So if you were here Sunday, or even if you weren't, what did he tell them? What does he tell them when it comes to how our view of suffering in this world should be? Should we dread it? Should we fear it? Should we expect it? Should we be happy about it? Right? Who did he say that we need to look at? Who do we need to look to as an example of how to properly handle temptation, how to properly handle suffering and strife? Obviously, Christ, absolutely. Right? He said that we're to expect and not fear trials and temptations. We read several verses, including in James, where it said, that's a good thing. When you suffer trials and temptations, that it helps strengthen you. It helps make you stronger. It helps you to be able to handle more things later. All along through the book of Peter, he's continued to tell his audience, prepare to suffer. But he also continues to remind them that this suffering, if done properly and handled properly, will not be in vain. Right? It's something that it's easier to suffer through something if you know that it's going to have a positive effect or a positive result in the end. And he encourages them to remember that the reward for living a Christ-like life is a Christ-like reward. And he reminds them, as we finished up previously, where Christ is today. Christ was our example. Christ was the most perfect person, and he lived, but he also suffered greatly, far greater than we will. But yet he is now at the right hand of God. So let's look tonight at picking up here in 1 Peter chapter 4. And we're going to start by just reading verses 1 through 6. So if you're not there, turn there with me as we read together. 1 Peter 4, chapter 1. Therefore, since Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with this same understanding. Because the one who suffers in the flesh is finished with sin, in order to live the remaining time in the flesh no longer for human desires, but for God's will. For there has already been enough time spent in doing what the Gentiles choose to do, carrying on an unrestrained behavior, evil desires, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, lawless idolatry. They are surprised that you don't join them in the same flood of wild living, and they slander you. They will give an account to the one who stands ready to judge the living and the dead. And for this reason, the gospel was also preached to those who are now dead, so that although they might be judged in the flesh according to human standards, they might live in the spirit according to God's standards. So, first of all, as we have been taught many, many times in context, the first word of the verse is therefore. And we always say, when it says therefore, we have to look at what it's there for, right? And it's leading us back to something that we had already studied. And so it says there, verse 1 shows us that that it's a continuation throughout the previous verses. And the thought is that we need to understand that Christ, who is our example, Christ, who is our person that we look to and on this earth, he obeyed the Father's will, but yet he had to suffer in doing so. But also that he was rewarded, and now, as the end of chapter 3 said, he is now seated at the right hand of God. So my first question in this section said, why do you think Peter is reminding them of this? And where in the previous chapter 3, where does he clearly state that? Anybody care to venture on that one? Verse 18. Okay, you want to read that for us?
For Christ also suffered once for sins, and just the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, being alive in spirit.
Exactly. Again, right there in verse 18, he tells us Christ suffered for all, for the righteous and the unrighteous, so that we may have an avenue to get to God. And also, I notice, if you go back just a couple of verses also to verse 22. Okay, so that's where he tells us Christ suffered. Verse 22 tells us where he is now, what his reward for suffering is. But why do you think Peter is reminding them of this? What's he trying to do? He's preparing them. And in doing so, by reflecting upon Christ, he is encouraging them. He's trying to give them encouragement. And as we read this today, he's encouraging us as well, right? I mean, when we read this, we know he's not writing to us specifically, but this is very applicable to us today. When we suffer, we need to understand that, hey, we have to understand that Christ also suffered. So why would we think we're any different? Why would we think that we should be better than that we shouldn't have to suffer? And then I said, what does that mean to us today? And I may have already stole my own thunder there, but what does that mean to us today? Not everybody at once. Yes, Todd, thank you.
I think it's kind of like we've said before in earlier classes of this, that even though for many of us, suffering may be a foreign concept or maybe something that we don't think about us doing all the time, we don't have to handle that on a daily basis. We still need to have that willingness to endure that we need to be prepared to do that as Christ did.
You're in my notes, man. You're in my notes. Thank you. Yes. So it says Christ, our perfect example, suffered for us. And anyone that wants to be a Christian, which means we're going to live like Christ, then we also must be prepared to suffer. If we want to live a life as he lived, then we also must have that same mindset that if he did it and it was good enough for him, it is definitely good enough for us. And it says, I wrote the people that Peter was writing to, they've already been suffering some. We saw that in 1 Peter chapter 1. But he also tells them very soon, chapter 4, verse 12, chapter 4, verse 12, he tells them that they are about to face fiery trials, is what the translation I have says. So he's saying, yes, I know you've suffered. This is not something that should be surprised by, but also it's going to get worse. And so you need to not only understand that, but you need to have that mindset of Christ that, Christ said, if it's your will, let this cup pass from me. So it means he wasn't necessarily looking forward to it, but he said, but nonetheless, it's not about me. It's about what you want. And so if that's your will for me, then that's fine. I will do it. And we need to have that same mindset that don't necessarily have to look for and seek out and desire suffering, but we need to have the mindset of Christ that if that's the will that you have for me, then your will be done and I will do it. Here in verse 2, he makes a statement. I thought it was a very interesting statement. And maybe your translation is different. I had a couple different translations. The translation I read, it says there in verse 2, in order to live the remaining time in the flesh, that is not verse 2. That is the end of verse 1. The one who suffers in the flesh is finished with sin. I've also seen in other translations, has ceased to sin. What do you think he means there? Yes, sir.
I think in the context, he is saying, one of the things he says is that to the extent that we suffer and can share in Christ's suffering, which you will talk about later on, that when he says cease from sin, that doesn't literally mean he never sins again. But I think what he's saying is, especially with the verses that follow, he said you can go one of two ways. You can live in debauchery and just living a party the rest of your life,
Mm-hmm.
or if you suffer for doing right, it gives you a different perspective on life and realize that life is not just a party, that you can be like Christ in suffering, and there's a different perspective on what's important in life, and to that extent, you're not the kind of sinner that you otherwise would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe if you did not hear that, and I'm going to come to you next, but basically David was saying that it doesn't necessarily mean that you've completely stopped sinning, that you become perfect, that you're never going to have another sin in your life. It's more, again, of having that Christ-like mentality, of having change of your mind, that your thoughts and desires are on the way things, on doing things the way Christ would have you to do, rather than doing it the way the world would have you to do. Yes, sir.
So John teaches that, Apostle John teaches that if we are in the light as he is in the light of Christ, then he continually cleanses us. It's a continual thing. So if you look in this verse, it says, prepare to suffer for the same purpose. Not the same suffering Christ went through, but purpose. Why did Christ suffer? Because it was God's will. And if we're suffering for God's will, then we are continually cleansed.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, and again, if it's hard to hear, someone told me Sunday morning it's hard to hear back and forth. So, basically, we're told to suffer for the same purpose that Christ suffered, and Christ suffered because it was God's will. And therefore, if we suffer with the same mindset that this suffering is because I'm trying to live my life as God would want me to live, then I'm doing it for the right reason, and I'm having that same mindset that Christ did, even though I may not suffer in the exact same way. I hope I paraphrased that pretty well close. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just thinking about Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus
Yes.
So I'm sure that's coming to his mind as he's penning this for us.
Absolutely, and the Beatitudes are also a wonderful resource for us to go. And again, just kind of paraphrasing is, blessed are those who suffer, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And so you're definitely, if you're suffering for the right reason, again going back to my statement before, if you live a Christ-like life, you will receive a Christ-like reward. All right, moving forward. Do you think it's possible? So, let me back up. So, I said, I definitely do not believe that this means that we are sinless or perfect. I do think it refers to a change in your state of mind. And it means that your desires and your efforts are based on doing good rather than doing the will of others and not doing God's will. But do you think it's possible to live your life thinking that you're doing God's will, but maybe not be doing God's will? I see a lot of people doing this.
Christ said that would happen.
He did. Christ said that would happen. Where did he say that? Matthew 7:21 verses. I have 21 through 23. He says there, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. And on that day, many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, do many wonders in your name?' And then I will announce to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you lawbreakers.'" So is it our perspective of we're doing God's will, or is it us making sure that we are overlaying ourselves over God's will and making sure it matches up?
We think we're doing God's will, not our impression of God's will.
Right.
Saul thought he was doing God's will.
Excellent example. He referenced Saul, right? Saul was very zealous for what he thought. He thought he was doing what was right, and obviously he was not. And so it can happen, and maybe we see that today, and it's very easy for us to look at others and say, wow, they're really zealous, but they're just not right. But we really need to make sure that we're looking at ourselves and making sure that we're not doing the exact same thing. I saw a quick hand, yes.
Verse 3, what I get from that is you have to make a decision as a Christian. You can't continue in your old ways. You have to be both feet in as a Christian or not. And then continuing with the thought that you have is, okay, now that you've done that, how do you know? Well, he's talked about that in chapter 2 of being bathed in the Word and longing for the Word. We have, as Christians, and him telling them there, you have to know the Word. You have to study. You have to know how you're supposed to live. And that's what he charges them with. That's a big message for us. Is if we're going to know if we're living right or not, we have to be in the Word and know what's right or not.
Right, yeah. You can't know if you're doing what's right or not if you don't know what's right or not. Absolutely. Yes, sir. One more.
Continuing with what he's saying, Paul said the same thing about his fellow Jews. He said, "I can testify about them that they have a zeal for God, but not based in knowledge." So the key is knowing, having knowledge. And sometimes, especially in our culture, we equate zeal with knowledge, and they're just not equal.
Absolutely. All right, moving on. So verses 3 through 6, it says, when one decides to live for Christ, they will be different from the world, and the world will notice, right? You know when someone's different, right? In a good way and in a bad way. It says, Peter tells them that those around them will be surprised that they are not doing the things that they do, and they will slander them. But they will have to give an account for the lives that they live, and they will receive their reward. When these Christians made changes in their lives, obviously the people around them noticed, right? Verse 4 says they are surprised that you don't join them in the same floods of wild living. So to me, it tells me that if he's saying that now all of a sudden the people around you are surprised that you're not doing it. What does that imply? What were they doing before that? They were doing it, right? They were fully participating. And so otherwise, why would they be surprised? Right? If they weren't already living their lives the same way, again, because we've said in the beginning, he's writing to Christians. He's writing to those. He's not writing to just everyone. So that implies that at one point, they were living their lives in the same way. And so, therefore, that's why it's shocking to them that, wait a minute. All of a sudden, why aren't you coming over and hanging out with us anymore? Why aren't you? So there had to be a definite, noticeable change. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's not a bad thing at all. If you make a decision and a change in your life and nobody notices, maybe you need to relook at that, right? Maybe we need to relook at that. He goes on to remind them that the ungodly will give an account to the one who stands ready to judge. The question there next in the handout says, Peter says that they will be judged in the flesh according to human standards, that they might live in the spirit according to God's standards. Why do you think he's trying to, or what do you think he's trying to tell them there?
People are watching.
People are watching. Yep. Right? Again, people notice. If you have been living just like everybody else and then all of a sudden you make changes, then they're going to notice, right? And it says, and I said, what does this mean to you and me? Yes?
If we are walking, living, conducting ourselves, dressing, behaving like the world around us, are we trying to live like Christ, or are we trying to blend in? We're not called to blend in. We need to be that light that the world notices.
Right.
That we are standing out, that we're different.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. We do need to be different. We need to stand out. We need to not be a little bit different. We need to be a lot different, because Jesus was. Yes, Charles.
Jimmy, it reminds me of the verse that says, beware when all men speak well of you. It really means that you're lying to somebody.
Yeah. As a coach, you get lots of praise, you get lots of criticism too, but you realize you can't make everyone happy. If you're making everyone happy, you're not doing something right. Yeah. All right. So moving on to the last section, if there's no other comments, 'cause we're about 7 minutes out. So I want to move on and make sure we cover this last section. There's some great stuff there. We're going to read starting in verse 7 through the end of my section, which is verse 11. So picking up there in verse 7, he says, the end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and sober-minded for prayers. Above all, maintain constant love for one another. Sincere love covers a multitude of sins. Be hospitable one to another without complaining. Just as each one of you has a gift, use it to serve others as good stewards of the varied grace of God. If anyone speaks, let it be as one who speaks God's words. If anyone serves, let it be from the strength that God provides, so that God may be glorified through Jesus Christ in everything. To him be the glory and power forever and ever. Amen. Again, a lot of great stuff in that short section. And I hope that we can give it just time. Verse 7 says the end is near. And as we know throughout the Bible, the end is quoted many times. But I think this is a little more specific. And my question is, given the time frame of Peter's letter and what we know about today, given history, what end do you think that he's talking about? Is it the end of the world?
He says the end of all things.
It says the end of all things.
And of course, they believed, they didn't know when it was, so they lived in expectation that it could be any
Okay. Anybody else?
He does say that there's one who's ready to judge the living and the dead, which sounds like the end of time, or the end of your opportunity,
Right.
whichever comes first.
Right. Also, what do we know about when was this written?
63.
Somewhere mid-60s, right? Pretty significant event happened right after that too, right? That was a big end. What was that? Destruction of Jerusalem, right? And in my research, the consensus of what I see, knowing that it was written somewhere in the mid-60s and Jerusalem fell a little bit later, which led to the Roman Empire, where the Christian suffering really ramped up in the Roman Empire times, leads me to believe that he may be more talking about the fall of Jerusalem instead of the end of time. Not necessarily 100% hard and fast, and think we have to argue about that one way or the other, but just kind of led me to believe in that direction. So it says, in light of these trials that he ends with in verse 7, he tells them to be alert and sober-minded for prayer. I think that's a great reminder for us, right? We all know that our end could be at any time. And we need to be alert. We need to be sober-minded. We need to have our mind set on things that Christ would have it to be. And again, he reminds us to pray. We need to be in prayer. We talk about God's word as him talking to us, but prayer is us talking back to him. A conversation that's one-sided is not very successful. A conversation needs to be going both ways. Verses 8 and 9 reminds them and us to keep fervent love for each other. And he says, when you truly love someone, there is little that can cause that love to go away. My question says, Peter says love covers a multitude of sin in verse 8. What do you think that means? What does that mean? We're getting short, but I sure would like to hear somebody's thoughts on that. Yes, sir.
Where we love one another, we are more willing to forgive, more willing to show kindness against slights that we may feel have come our way.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a spirit there that is absent where that love does not exist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it does not mean that we just love, because I just love you so much, I'm going to ignore your sin. It means I love you so much that I'm willing to forgive you and I'm willing to be there for you. Ephesians 4:32, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving one another just as God forgave you in Christ. Matt?
Proverbs 10:12, I have notes here, but the phrase I've been unsure about a long time.
Yes, sir.
What it means, but Proverbs 10:12 almost repeats it verbatim, but James 5:20 says the same thing, cover a multitude of sins, but what it says is that whoever turns a sinner from the error of his way will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. The assumption is save his soul. You turn a sinner from the error of their way, you save his soul from death. So not your own, obviously, and so then covering a multitude of sins, it does seem like it's theirs that you're covering, theirs that you're potentially overlooking because they're your brother. But it's interesting that the phrase, it appears 3 times in the Bible.
Yes, sir. And we know if it's something that's repeated more than once, there's a reason. In the last couple minute or so, less than a minute, I want to point out he specifically talks about hospitality, and I think that's a great thing that we need to remember. Hospitality isn't necessarily just having people into your home. It's more of a general concern and care for each other, and I think it's great that he points that out because that's something that we can all do. That's something we can all do. We can all have a general care and concern for each other. But then he also mentions having God-given abilities that we are supposed to be a good steward of. In our congregation, we have so many people that are so wonderful at so many different things, with cards or meal lists or phone calls or prayers or just anything. We have so many people have said we have so many great song leaders, and we have so many great people that can teach Bible class, present company excluded. But we have a lot of people that can do a lot of things. And we have to be reminded that we all have a gift that's been given from God, and we're going to have to answer for whether or not we use that. I really, really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your comments, and appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you for these 2 classes. Thank you so very much.